Hello, Ken.
Hello, Tatiana.
I'm going to ask you a few questions. Would you mind?
No, please do.
All right. I would like to know how and when and why did you get into Scientology?
I got into Scientology in 1957 in London. My father had been, was a theosophist, and he was the principal figure in theosophy in Wales, where I was born, although he was Scottish. And before the war, he had a number of friends who were in theosophy with him. One of them in particular moved away during the war, and he got in touch with my father after the war. And the two families became friends. And when after I left home in Wales to go to London to study music at college, this man got in touch with me one day. He wrote to me and said that he had arranged to go for a weekend activity in this place in London, and he was paying for me to go with him. And he gave me the name and address of the place. It was the HASI, the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International. I had no idea what Scientology was all about. I wrote to them and they sent me a magazine, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. However, he was a friend of the family, he was paying for it, so I thought I will accept his invitation and go. And it turned out to be what they called in those days a weekend intensive of group auditing. We had 14 hours of group auditing on Saturday afternoon and Sunday. The intensive was given in the big room in the HASI London in 37 Fitzroy Street on the first floor, and it was packed with people. We had, as I said, 14 hours of group processing with, I think, 4, maybe 5 different auditors. Processes were all objective, mostly, like looking at things and touching things, touching other people, speaking to other people. There was one process in particular that really got me, and that was the auditor, the friend of the room. He had a piece of carbon paper up on the wall, 2, one on each side, and one was object 1, the other was object 2, and the commands were look at object 1. Thank you, look at object 2. Thank you, look at object 1. Thank you, look at object 2. And this went on for an hour. And it was supposed to run out hypnosis, and it certainly did on me. Anyway, at the end of the 14 hours, I was very impressed. Firstly, because I felt all the cobwebs had been blown out of my mind. And secondly, I was very impressed with the presence of the group auditors. Now, as I said, I was studying music, and one of my really big problems was stage fright. I just couldn't get myself playing in front of other people without going through all kinds of terror and panic. And these people just stood up in front of everybody and did their job. That really got me. So I was very interested in pursuing being an auditor. But my OCA test was mostly along the bottom. So I wasn't acceptable for professional training. But I did all the other courses that I could do that were available to me, and I did the public audit. But I was hooked more or less by that experience of the group intensive. The group auditing intensive. It really moved me into a new place altogether as a person.
Okay. And then how did you continue? Did you go as a public, or did you go working on staff?
I was public.
Public. How was the work at that time? How were people inside the work? How was the atmosphere?
In the org?
Mm-hmm.
It was very friendly.
Mm-hmm.
It was very businesslike, but also very friendly, very purposeful. But everybody was friendly and open, welcoming. It seemed mostly very non-judgmental.
Okay. All right. And so, how did it go? Did you continue as a public?
Yes, I did the extension course, which is a correspondence course on the 4 basic books. I did the course, I don't know how many times. I did a lot of TRs. And I did a public co-audit. I went to public tape lectures. The co-audit was fun. The course was, I think, my most favorite action, doing the TRs over and over.
Communication?
Yes.
TRs?
And there was one time I was doing the course, I remember, when I was coaching a little old English lady on TR0. And this was not the bull-baited TR0. And she was doing just fine. I had no reason to flunk her. So I was just observing how well she was doing, and I'm observing her face, and she had that lovely English skin. I was noticing that, how lovely her skin was. And I'm just thinking that behind her skin is her skull. And then specifically I thought behind the skin and her forehead is her brain. And as I thought that, her forehead disappeared. And I was looking directly at her brain. And as that happened, I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? I thought, her brain's going to get cold. So immediately the forehead went right back. And I didn't think to mention anything about it, but I never forgot that. I had some processing, which was very interesting and very good. I don't remember any marked, specific, particular gains from it, but I was glad that I had it. Then, during that part of my life, I used to get very severe cluster headaches, which are like migraines. And at one point it got so bad, I was desperate, and I went into the org and I asked for some emergency auditing. So I had one weekend, and that went okay, but I still had the headaches. So I begged for another weekend, which was actually, they weren't supposed to do, but they gave me another weekend. And during that weekend, they ran some processing. It was all to do with help. And the incident from which the headache pain was coming from came up. And we ran it out with the same process, and I never had those headaches again. Then that takes us up through around 1960, and in about 1962 I started getting some auditing from a staff member at Saint Hill. His name was Edgar Watson. He was later declared SP. Well, I don't think he was suppressive. However, he was a very good auditor. I enjoyed my sessions with him very much. Got a lot of gain out of them. And probably after a year and a half of these sessions, which I had every Sunday, I was living in London, and I travelled down to East Grinstead every Sunday to have my session or two with Edgar. He was still on staff at Saint Hill, and he was made responsible for recruiting personnel. And just as that he was given that responsibility, Ron's butler was alleged to have stolen a camera. And so he was out, and Edgar had to find a new butler quickly. And I don't know exactly why he asked me, but he did. He asked me if I was interested. The only connection I had with that kind of work was that while I was struggling as a a musician in London, to pay my way, I would work in West End restaurants as a waiter. And I think at the time I was actually a wine waiter. So I knew how to serve a table. That's as far as I could go in being a butler. But anyway, it didn't take me long to decide that since I'd had so much gain from the work of L. Ron Hubbard, if I could return something to him, then I definitely wanted to do that. So I said to Edgar, yes, I'd like to apply. So he was happy with that. He brought me down to Saint Hill and took me in to see Ron's private secretary, who was an English lady, very lovely lady, not a Scientologist then, but she got clear later. And she was very glad to see me because the work of running the house had fallen on her plate since the butler had left, and she really didn't really have time to do that. So she was very happy to see me, and so Edgar then took me in to see Ron for my interview with Ron. And he took me into Ron's office. This was in a lovely big room on the ground floor of the manor with very tall ceilings and very tall windows, very handsome room. And Ron was at the end behind his desk. And Edgar led me up to Ron. Ron stood up behind his desk. He held out his hand, arm up, and I took his hand, and I felt such a flow of affinity and ARC from and with this person that I hardly knew what I was saying, but what came out of my mouth was, I'm going to do my very best for you. And he kind of blinked and said, thank you. And with that, I turned around and left. So that was the end of my interview with Ron. And in fact, I kind of hired myself into the post of his butler.